Okay, time for part two. Let's go back to our PowerPoint and take a look at what's going on now that we understand the idea of bonds have some advantages and some disadvantages. Bonds actually trade like stocks. They have a closing price, they have a yield, they have a change. And frankly, in the world of equities and bonds, there are actually more bonds out there than there are stocks in terms of dollar value. So there are more bonds issued than shares of stock issued as far as market value. So, and we can talk about bonds trading at 103, which is 3% over their face value, or at 98, which is 2% less than their face value. So, and here IBM stock is being sold 103 at face value on the bonds associated. So we issue at par. Par means the stated rate equals the market rate. So in our example of 10%, when we were taking a look at the bonds associated, we had $10 million, 10%. That means the 10% stated rate equals the 10% market, in this case 8% equals 8%. So we get the cash and we have a bond payable showing up on our books. As we pay the interest expense gets recorded. It's going to be whatever the percentage is, and this is semi-annual, so half a year times the 8% times 100,000 is $4,000 every 6 months. So every $4,000 every 6 months until maturity, and then we pay the $100,000 back. 100,000 at the end of the term goes right back to whoever gave us the money in the first place. But this is what I was getting at before. We have a market rate and a stated or contract rate. If the contract rate of 10% is greater than the market rate of 9%, that bond is more valuable. It sells at a premium. People will pay more for it. You can charge more for it. You deserve to charge more for it because that's what the market's telling you can do. If the contract rate equals a market rate, in our last 8% example, bonds sell at par value, face value. And if the contract rate is less than the market rate, or 10% contract rate or stated rate is less than 11% market rate, you can't get as much money for it. Bonds sell at a discount, an inverse relationship. So how do discounts work? 8%, 10%, stated rate, market rate. Sells at a discount because the stated rate is less, the bonds are more valuable, so they can command, you're not going to get as much money for an 8% bond as you would for a 10% bond. 2-year maturity, kind of short. So how do we record that? Well, we only got $96,400 in cash, but we have a $100,000 bond payable or liability to record. The difference is $3,600, a contra liability account, an offset to the bond. So we'll show bond payable $100,000, and then we'll show discount on bond payable $3,600 for a net book value of this bond, $96,400. Now, eventually that $3,600 will go away. By the time the bond matures, that discount will go to zero, and we'll write the check for $100,000 and pay it all back. This is how it flows. Every 6 months, when we make an interest payment, on a straight line basis, we're going to amortize that $3,600 to the tune of $900, $900, $900, $900 every 6 months as we pay interest. And then the premium is the opposite. We will sell bonds at a premium if the market rate is below the actual stated rate issued on the bonds. Now we're getting $103,600 in cash for a $100,000 bond. And that's a premium. And we do the same thing. This time, $900 in excess, we will be reducing the premium as that goes. And finally, when we retire the bonds, we give the money back and we clear the bond payable. That's the flow, that's the direction, and we're done. When we retire before maturity, we may say we can call the bonds in advance. What happens if the market rate went from 10 down to 4? The company would like to call those because they can reissue those bonds at a 4% interest rate. And they say, why would I pay 10% when I can pay 4? So they call them back. and they will be taking and giving the money back to whoever the investor is and reissuing bonds most likely at a lower rate to save them lots of money over the long term. So what happens? Usually there's a stipulation in the callable bond. We have to do it at 104.5, 4.5% over the face value. So we have to pay out cash, 3%. This is a 3% callable bond 100,000. We pay out $103,000. We clear the premium account, but the net is a gain on the retirement of bonds. If we retire and if we don't refinance, and if we do, we'll get no lower interest rate to boot to go with that. So there's conversions as well. You can convert to stock. A convertible bond is kind of attractive. You can say, for every $1,000 worth of bonds, I can get 20 shares of stock. When would you do that? Well, 20 shares into $1,000, that's $50 a share. If the market rate of the stock is $30 a share when you buy the bonds, no advantage to converting it. $40 a share, no advantage. But if 5 years from now, 6 years from now, the stock is trading at $60 or $70 a share, you have a great advantage of being able to convert that. So you would take advantage most likely and convert the stock. And this is how to account for it. You have common stock, additional paid-in capital, and the $100,000 bonds are retired. Then long-term notes payable. There's something called a single payment. We'll look at that right now. Single payment or principal plus interest at maturity. So maybe not every 6 months. Maybe it's a one-time payment as you go. Or maybe it is regular payments. Principal plus interest. This is a mortgage, by the way. Bonds, by the way, are interest-only payments. But a mortgage, every mortgage payment you make, you're paying principal and interest. So there's a portion of that payment that goes to interest. Your car loan, same way. House loan, building loan, same way. Eventually the loan gets paid off and the interest is built into it as you go. And what's a mortgage note and bonds? A mortgage is a legal agreement. Protect the lender if the borrower fails to make required payments. It basically gives a borrower some assurance that if the borrower defaults, there's an underlying asset that they can take and they can convert. So a mortgage on a house, if you don't pay the mortgage, the bank gets the house, not you, usually. And we talked about a couple of features. Secured, unsecured, like a mortgage is secured, and a bond payable is typically unsecured. But convertible and callable is what I want to mention again. So convertible is an advantage to the company. It's a disadvantage to the buyer. So that's going to affect the premium or discount in the bond. It's not as worth, if you told me I got a 10% bond, let's say I just retired, I bought a 20-year bond, and I expect 10% a year. In 5 years from now, the market rate's 5%, and the company says, oh, I'm gonna buy your bond back. I'll pay you that 3 points, 103 on the bond, 3% over face value. But when I was counting on retirement for 20 years, after 5 years, kaput, it's gone. That's a feature that I don't like personally, except that I might be willing to accept that risk if they're willing to pay me more for it. And they do. If it's got a convertible feature, it's going to cost the company more to issue that bond. It changes the market rate associated, because a convertible bond has a certain market rate and a non-convertible bond would have a higher market rate. And then a callable bond, a company may not like. They might say, I don't want to have to convert to stock and my stock hits the roof. It's advantageous to you, but not to me. And the company's going to say, I'm going to make you pay extra for that feature. So some bonds aren't callable or convertible. Some are callable, not convertible. Some are convertible, not callable, and some are both. But that factors into the pricing associated with the bond. And preferred stock has similar functionality, convertible features and callable features. We'll see that when we do stocks next chapter. Finally, debt to equity ratio. We've done debt to assets before, total liabilities over total assets. Debt to equity is total liabilities over total equity. Pretty clean, pretty direct, makes some sense. And then some bond pricing. What is a bond worth? I mentioned the discounted cash flows are the interest payments, cash outflows, and the ending par value that's paid back. There's two cash flows. You do something called present value of an annuity and present value of a single sum. You total those together at the market rate of interest, not the stated rate. Stated rate would be whatever the face value is. But at the market rate, you calculate what that bond is worth. And that's what people will pay. And that's what the price of the bond will be issued for. Okay. Present value discount back to today. And this is just how the price of the bond is determined. Maturity value, present value of one. Interest payments, present value of an annuity by whatever factors. So this $100,000 bond is worth $96,454. Okay. Based on a $4,000 payment, market rate of interest is 10%, bond stated rate is 8%. So the price is less. I can't get as much because the market's going to pay more than I'm willing to pay or than I stated when the board of directors approved it and sent it out to print them and sell them. Premium, actually opposite. The market rate was less than the stated rate. And then you've got the premium. And I'm going to mention the effective interest method. We're not going to worry about too much about it in this class, but you will be more when you are trying to figure out how to calculate bonds. It's much like double declining balance. It's taking the balance on the bond and using the effective interest rate, the market rate, to calculate. And there's a table here. You might recognize this. You got a carrying value. In this case, it was discounted down to $96,400 from $100,000. We take our rate, we multiply it out, we amortize, and unamortized discount, the discount's going to be amortized at different amounts, not straight line, but increasing amounts until the maturity of the bond. Again, not worrying about it here, but I want you aware of what the effective interest rate method is all about. And then premium, same kind of thing. You take a percentage based on the carrying value. So the cash paid is different from the interest expense, because interest expense combined with the premium amortization is your total cash paid. So the interest expense is calculated. The journal entry has these three line items on it, and that's how it gets flowed. That's how it goes through. And finally, I'll talk about leases and pensions just a wee bit. So what's a lease? By the way, I keep suggesting not to get a loan on a vehicle for 5 years or even 7 years they do now, because a lot can change in 5 years. What happens if you buy that two-door sports car, a year later you get married, a year later you have twins, that two-door sports car is not going to fit twins too well, especially if there's no back seat. So what's going to happen? You're going to want to get a four-door or a minivan. I like minivans, better than SUVs actually. More space to play with. But times change, life changes. You got to be careful, and you want to make sure that the short-term loan is one of the reasons you don't want to go too long, because needs might change. You might start by having a job that you're commuting 10 miles, and then you get a new job, and now you're in Columbia or Charlotte, you're still commuting down here from Florence, and you got a much more miles you put in your car, and you pay extra. On a lease, you have to actually pay extra per mile if you go over 10 or 12,000 miles a year. Leases are bad news when it comes to car purchases. It's great for the dealership. That's why they push it. In 3 years, they guarantee they're going to have to give you another car. If they sold you a car, you might pay off your loan in 3 years, and now you're living debt-free and having a car you don't have to pay for a while. Or you get a used car, even a beater. So, but leases are basically a form of financing, and after the end of a period, you usually give the asset back. It usually transfers ownership. If it transfer ownership to the lessee, the person leasing, it's not really a lease, it's actually a buy. You're selling it and you're acquiring the asset. Purchase option, a bargain purchase option that you're probably going to exercise. Again, you probably own it. Lease term, more than 75% of the economic life. You will probably be using the majority of whatever the asset is. Present value of lease payments equal or exceed virtually the fair market value, or the assets are specialized and basically no one else can use it. These are all examples of a finance lease that basically is financing, made like a loan. And it used to be you would be able to put a lease. I leased a car, paying $200 a month. They have no liability, no asset. You just have the monthly expense. That's changed. There's new lease regulations that kicked into gear last year. And those regulations say you need to capitalize, you need to amortize, depreciate, and you need to record the obligation. So an investor knows, well, I've got 10 lease vehicles. They're worth $200,000. And those are payments for the next 3 years. So if you get the company, you're on the hook for these leases. So you get to find it in the balance sheet. You can't just record the expense on the income statement anymore. You used to be able to do that. Operating leases are just like that. Term, I've got a copier for 5 years. The last 10 years, I'm paying $100 a month. No big deal. Again, the new lease regulations say I'm still going to have to capitalize. And then there's pensions. And briefly, there's defined benefit pensions that you are guaranteed a certain level of benefit, like the state of South Carolina. If you work so many years in the system and you're part of the pension system, they'll pay you a pension benefit. Okay? And defined benefits say, here's the benefit. Defined contribution is those 401ks that a company will match. A contribution they will make, or you will make, or both will make. And those are, you're not guaranteed anything. It's based on return in the marketplace. So when I came on board Francis Marion, I need to work here 20, 25 years to take advantage of a defined benefit plan, and I still have to contribute money. So it was actually, I had the option to go into a 401k, which is what I'm doing. And the school is matching a portion of that, my contributions in that 401k, and that's an immediate payoff. And then hopefully the investments that they are in will additionally pay off. So pension funds are interesting stuff to account for and can be really big tickets. It can force a company to go bankrupt. GM was one of those that had major pension obligations. They used to have tens of thousands of employees. Then they dropped 1,000 employees that had to pay for the pensions of the tens of thousands that had retired. The economics don't work. You're in the military. If you're 20 years in, you can retire at half pay. It's like the average of the last 3 years of salary or wage. But you're on half pay, and so you go in at 20, you come out at 40, and you live to 70, you're collecting 30 years more of pay, more than you ever took out when you were actually working, when you were actually in the military. So 20 years and 30 years goes up to 3/4. It's up from half pay. So there's pensions. Post office used to be famous. Railroads were famous. Government pensions were always famous because you worked long enough and hard enough, and they will be rewarding you because you will get a guaranteed payment from your pension plans. State of Illinois is in deep doo-doo right now because they have pension guarantees and they can't afford them. And that's obligations for school teachers and municipal workers, government workers. So pensions are, most federal and state agencies are trying to get away from pensions because of the future obligations incurred. That's the chapter. We have one more to go and we will be complete. I look forward to sharing that with you soon. Thank you for your time. Appreciate your efforts. Good luck.